Welcome back. As we mentioned, it is the final full day of campaigning, and neither candidate wants to waste 1 second of it. Donald Trump today hitting 3 battleground states with a rally this morning in North Carolina ahead of 2 stops on opposite sides of Pennsylvania before closing things out tonight in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the same location of his final rally in 2016 and 2020. As for Vice President Harris, it's all Pennsylvania all day with stops in Scranton and Allentown and rallies in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Joining me now on set is NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd, former Arizona Republican senator and Biden administration ambassador to Turkey Jeff Flake, former HUD secretary under former President Obama, and an NBC News political analyst Julian Castro, and former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence, Marc Short. He is also an NBC News political analyst. Thanks to all of you for being here. We're joking. This is what the gender gap looks like. We've got it right here on set. Chuck, thank you all for being here. Start us off. You and I spend a lot of time during campaigns talking about where the candidates are campaigning. Right. What do you make of this final day?
Well, I mean, it's nice to see neither one of them is looking at some fantasy map anymore, right? You know, when Hillary Clinton was doing Arizona and Texas and that 2016 and those infamous decisions, and not in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. The fact they're both, you know, I think it says a lot on her that she's only doing Pennsylvania today, right? Says something to me that the only Sunbelt state he decided he had to go into is North Carolina. You do hear they're nervous about North Carolina. Look, his simplest path to 270 is Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. And her simplest path is Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. What's the one state in common, right? So where is she living? I mean, it's where look, she wins that. It complicates his path all over the map.
Yeah, absolutely. Senator, what do you make of these final stops that we're seeing? And frankly, the final strategy. The Harris campaign still feels bullish that they can win over skeptical Republicans who are skeptical of Trump. Is that wishful thinking at this point? What are you seeing when you watch the strategy?
Well, first, I'm disappointed nobody's in Arizona today. But they were just there.
Take too long to count the ballots.
They were there.
You know, will you speed it up with the ballot counting and we'll come more? No.
Well, I don't think it's wishful thinking to get Republicans. I think that is happening. It's certainly happening in Arizona. It did last time in 2020. And I think it is this time. I mean, campaigning with Liz Cheney, I think that was a brilliant move. I think that that's coming. She's spending her time where she needs to in Pennsylvania today.
Secretary Castro, what do you make of what we are seeing, and where do you think the momentum is right now? Because you saw our NBC News poll. This is a tied ball game. This could go either way, and you hate to say it because it's a complete cliche, but it does come down to the ground game. The Harris campaign feels very bullish about their ground game, but it's hard to know what that actually translates to.
You know, I was in Nevada, in Las Vegas over the weekend, and, you know, Clark County is so important, and it looks like they've been behind, and they need Clark to come out, and you saw the power of that ground game. Over 200 people there assembled, ready to go out and canvass, a lot more out in the field. So, yeah, I think she has an advantage there. I like the contrast that she has right now as her closing message. Positive. I'm going to be a president for everyone. Optimistic. Also, the bio ad that she put out about, you know, her family, her mother, contrasted with the last week for him has been reminding people why they rejected him in 2020. The comments in Madison Square Garden, this weird stuff about, you know, no more vaccines under Robert Kennedy Jr. It's just, I think it's reminding people in a negative way why they didn't say yes again to him 4 years ago.
Marc, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about the early vote and whether it matters, because the Trump campaign has been touting the fact that more Republicans are turning out this year than they have in past cycles. They see that as a sign that Trump is getting more of the early vote, but you say it's a lot more complicated.
I think it is more complicated. I think it's definitely a big plus for Republicans in the Trump campaign that they've had that much early vote. But as the senator knows, there were 90,000 Republican voters in Arizona in 2016 who did not choose Trump at the top of the ticket, 60,000 in 2020 who did not. And I think that Iowa poll shows evidence of more and more potentially 65 and above women who are switching. So yeah, it's a good news, but it's a good data point, but it's in no way conclusive about where this is going to go.
I want everyone's take on the Iowa poll, how significant the Harris campaign says. It doesn't mean we're going to win Iowa, but we sure like the numbers when it comes to women voters.
Well, that was the big figure. 65 plus white women, enthusiastic and voting. And you can count on those voters to vote, unlike some of the younger people who you want to vote, certainly, but they don't. But the older voters do. And the fact, or according to this poll, that white women are voting in such numbers for Kamala, that's a very good sign for their campaign.
Chuck, it's interesting because our poll has looked at what's the top issue, the economy. No surprise, that's been a consistent in every poll. And then we asked, what's the issue that motivates you most? Right. And reproductive rights was at the top of that list. What do you make of that?
Look, I have this quote from Anna Palmer. She's one of the founders of Punchbowl. She said this after the 22. She goes, I don't know if Republicans win another national election until this is resolved. Until the abortion issue is resolved. And I remember that's a pretty big blanket statement there. But I understand, and it's possible that is that simple, right? When you see this shift in older voters, particularly older women, look, we're going to have the biggest gender gap we've ever had. The question is, how big is it going to be? But let's remember this. If Trump pulls this off, it means he got younger men to show up. Right. Which is just as significant and also increases our gender gap. I do think we are headed to a politics that's going to be quite uncomfortable if our gender gap is in the 30s. I'll just be honest. It's going to be a shock to the system. And if the Republican Party loses, one would assume they will do some inward looking. But what if you are able to win and lose women by that margin? What does that do to governing?
Well, what about that? I mean, because Trump, in our latest poll, is leading with men by more than Vice President Harris is leading with women. So that's still, at least according to our poll, an uphill fight for her.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and I think that, you've seen the Harris campaign also make appeals to men, right? And why you should be concerned about these draconian measures on reproductive rights and try and get that crossover support gender-wise. So they've made the effort. I think on the other side, though, Trump hasn't. And I think that could make the difference.
Mark, is it overstated to say that Republicans will struggle in national elections until this issue around reproductive rights is resolved in some way?
I'm not willing to see that at all. I think you see Kim Reynolds win, you see Ron DeSantis win, you see Brian Kemp win in states. I accept that's not a national election, but at the same time, I think the Democrat position of abortion on demand for all 9 months is what's really outside the mainstream. I don't think Republicans are articulating that well. But, Kristen, I still feel that, this is an election that should be a landslide for Republicans with the issues really of economy and the border issues at the top of the ticket, that 70% of Americans feel we're headed in the wrong direction. But when we're talking about fluoride in your water, we're talking about vaccines, we're talking about, firing squad Liz Cheney, it's like we're not taking advantage of really what the opportunity presents itself to Republicans.
Or worse, Mark, denying that he said firing squad, but instead it was arming. I mean, when the correction only reinforces the weirdness of what you were offering.
Keep the news cycle going longer.
What are you doing? Sorry.
The corrections have been a bit of backflips. That is true. We should say abortions later in pregnancy are very rare. Right. I do want to talk about some down ballot races. You raised some of those other races. Chuck, what are you watching for? One of the interesting races is in Texas. Obviously, we're watching Ohio. Montana seems like it could be a done deal.
I'll just say two quick things. I want to hear other people's comments here, too. One is, I think Ohio Senate will tell us how accurate this Seltzer poll is.
Okay.
If older whites are doing this, I think the first place we'll see it, because it's an earlier poll close. I'm just saying that's the first place to check to see, is she onto something? Because if Harris loses Ohio by 5 or less, that's how Sherrod Brown wins. So that would tell us something. The second thing is, how many Trump voters just show up, vote Trump, and leave? The fall-off number I've talked to Senate Republican strategists who are nervous about this, that explains why Sam Brown is behind. This explains why in Nevada. This explains why Hovde seems to be a point or two behind. This explains why Rogers is a point or two behind. I think McCormick's the only one that's found a way, because he's got so much money in Pennsylvania. So that's the second thing I'm looking for.
Okay, fascinating. Senator, what about you? Someone who knows this turf well.
I do. I remember in 2012 talking about these issues, some reproductive rights issues. That was the Todd Aiken legitimate rape election.
That's right.
And I can tell you, as a Senate candidate, that shaved 2 or 3 points off of any Republican Senate.
It hurt you.
Oh, it did.
That much.
Significant.
Wow.
Significant.
Wow.